Hello there, my name is Jennifer Stirrup and I'm here today to explain to you how to please your CEO using Power BI and the power of data visualization. Now the truth is, when we talk to our CEO, we only need a few metrics, and some of those metrics are listed here. If you're interested in more information about these, I recommend that you look at Bernard Marr's material up on LinkedIn. He's another Brit, and he talks a lot about this. So we actually have got 4 main metrics here, which we're going to highlight. Now, the first one is customer satisfaction. If your customers are not happy, then you're going to have real problems trying to keep a happy business and keep your business running. Instead of your business stopping dead like a heart attack, it will be more like a slow death if you're not pleasing your customers. So actually your customer satisfaction index is really important. So how you measure that is quite simply add up all of your customer satisfaction scores over a period of time and simply take the average. That's a very simple way of doing it. Now another metric that we're very interested in is the internal process quality metric. Now, if you're a consulting firm, you might have different ways of measuring your success. That success could be by project, it could be by the return on investment made, or it could even be the amount of money that you've saved your customers by actually conducting the project in the first place. So internal process quality can mean different things, but basically it's a measure of how well you do what you're good at. And hopefully what you're good at is what you're actually selling to your customers. And companies really need to make sure that the services and products are to the expected standard. And if they're not, they really need to optimize the way that these services or products are delivered. Now, a third one, an extremely important metric, is the employee satisfaction metric. Now, for that, we can do something quite similar. We can work out how happy people are. Now, normally, that sort of rating data is not actually data that you can multiply, add, divide, because if you, for example, have a 5-point scale, what someone regards as happy might be someone else's not quite so happy. So what we might find there is that data is more called a Likert scale data, it's more rating data. So what we can do there is simply count up how many people are happy and so many people are not quite so happy. Very, very simply, I had one HR director once who would send an email round the office and would say, give me a happy face or give me a sad face. And then he would count up the happy faces and the sad faces, and he would try and track those over time. That's a very simple metric, but I know it seems a bit facile, but it's actually nicer to do something than to not measure employee happiness at all. And the final one we have here is the Financial Performance Index. All organisations, whether they are large or small, need to ensure that it satisfies shareholders if they are a public company by delivering turnover growth and healthy profits. We also, depending on the type of organisation you are, you might have to prove that you deliver value for money to your taxpayers or your investors or even your members if you're an association. Even organisations like the internal IT function may have to ensure that they control costs and generate efficiency savings. So how do we visualise our data in order to make that as clear as possible? Now, what we've done here is I've listed out a few definitions of data visualization, and then I'm going to talk to you a little bit how we can make data visualization more clear so that our CEO can pick up the information as quickly as possible. So the definition we have here is one given by Jock McKinley and others, and he identifies it as the use of computer-supported, interactive, visual representations of data to amplify cognition. Now, CEOs are busy people, and we need to try and give them the information as quickly and adeptly as possible. And that's where data visualization starts to come in. So when we look at certain books, for example, The Heart of Darkness, The Heart of Change rather, gives you a definition. It says that the single most important message in the book, The Heart of Change, is very simple. People change what they do because they are given the analysis that shifts their thinking, rather than because they are shown a truth that influences their feelings. With the data visualization, we are trying to make sure that the visualization of the data is as true as possible. So here's another one by Tamara Munzer. Computer-based visualization systems provide visual representations of data sets. Now, for our CEO, what we're trying to do is take machine-scale data and make it human-scale, make it very easy for them to understand so that it's digestible and it facilitates quick decision-making. And why do we need to do that? Well, the reality is that we now live in the data deluge environment. Lots of data is being produced. In fact, more data has been produced in the last 2 years than at any other point in history. And there's so much data, but computers have promised us a fountain of wisdom, but delivered a flood of data. So we have to do better in order to analyze the data and make it clear. Now, we have to also make sure the data is correct. Here we have an example. The NHS records 20,000 pregnant men in the UK. Obviously, the data is badly incorrect. If not, it was quite a party. So what we'll do there is really focus on the fact that our data has to be absolutely correct all of the time. Visualizations require very good and very specific highlighted data. It's a bit like Donald Rumsfeld and his unknown unknowns. People don't know what they don't know always, but we can try and build as much as we can from the context, and we get that looking at lots of data around us. So we have our data as our black gold. It's something we hear a lot. Data is the new oil. And the idea is that data can be reused and mined for profit. And that's what we have to be very mindful of when we speak to our CEO. It can be reshaped in order to be reused. But the truth is, if you don't have your data, you don't have anything. Fundamentally, you've lost your business. And your CEO will want that data visualized in a way he can understand. When we present data in a table like this, it's very hard to identify the commonalities in the data, the patterns and the trends. But when we visualize data, as we see here, it's actually a very interesting way of exploring the data, and it also exposes the truth of the data as well. So here we have a large data set, and that's been given to us, and then we've got the goal to learn something about that data. Visualization is employed to perform pattern detection, and it uses the human visual system in order to do that. It means we can generate hypotheses, such as how well is a business performance going, or alternatively, what is our employee satisfaction looking like? We can generate these hypotheses, and then we can test them with statistical methods. Now, one very important historical information where data visualization has gone wrong can be found in the history of NASA. Now, the Challenger, the Space Shuttle Challenger, exploded in 1986, and it actually exploded because of poorly functioning O-rings either side of the booster rocket. However, it wasn't the O-rings that sent people into space. People sent that shuttle into space. It wasn't the O-rings. And those people drew their most critical business information from two very simple charts, screened by an overhead projector. Unfortunately, the pictures were very difficult to understand. And here's one of them. This looks like a box of crayons. It doesn't show very well the effect of the temperature on the booster O-rings at the side of the rocket. Now, the O-rings were holding the shuttle together as it went up into the sky. Now, actually, they froze, and because they froze, that meant that they couldn't move with the shuttle as it went into the sky. So they disintegrated, they fell off, and that meant that the shuttle disintegrated as well. It wasn't obvious that the colder the temperature, the higher likelihood it was that the O-rings would actually freeze like that. Now, a gentleman called Edward Tufte, who presented at the Data Science Summit here a few days ago. He revisualized that data. And what he did was he showed that as the temperature decreased, the likelihood increased that the O-rings would actually freeze like that. So it's very important to think to ourselves, well, why are we visualizing data? It's not an endless, difficult task, but it is something that has to be done. And really, if we do our data visualization correctly, then that means that we have business intelligence as a competitive advantage for our organization. And it really is interesting how we can classify our approaches to data. We can see it as a tactical exercise which helps us to run the business, or we can see it in terms of business analytics, which allow us to change the business. I'll let you look at this slide and try to work out where your particular organization is, but you should know that your organization should be attempting to win with data, and hopefully you're not just using your data to keep the lights on. So what we have here is a table of data which has been taken from Wikipedia, and it's the Zimbabwean inflation rates. Now these are the official inflation rates produced by the Zimbabwean government, and they go all the way back to 1980. It's very difficult to discern any patterns in the data looking at this. And in fact, this is very common across different domains. Professor Stephen Hawking commented once that each equation in a brief history of time would halve the sales, because it would make the book much more difficult to understand. People want things as easy as possible, and this table doesn't make things very easy to understand. But when we recreate that table, we can see very clearly that hyperinflation started towards the tail end around 2004. Now, it's very difficult to get that when we simply look at the table. And in fact, in the year 2008, the rate of hyperinflation went up to 231,150,888%. So that's an incredible amount of hyperinflation, which you don't get from the chart, but you do actually see it in the chart here, but you don't get it from the table. But what we can do is we can translate that into a picture. Now, $1 billion note at that time would buy you 3 eggs or 2 apples. And at that point, this picture really starts to show the human tragedy behind the hyperinflation. The pictures tell a story, but the data give us some detail on what's happening. So a picture really is worth 1,000 words. Now, I know in a sea of big data, everyone is very focused on big data at the moment, and I understand that. However, what we have here is a focus on the little data. It can be just as important as the big data that companies aspire to use. Now, only 4% of American companies, according to Gartner, have allowed 50% of employees to use their whole data. So what we see here is, unfortunate, organizations can only be as smart as the data that they allow their organizations access to. The reason is that skimming is a dominant mode of thought, and for the CEO, this is very important as well. We simply have to just keep trying to give that data in as digestible a format as possible. Because ultimately, if you are not giving your data to the CEO in the way that he needs it, then he's not going to be able to make effective business decisions. And we do make those at the bird's eye level. As we have the quote here, genius depends upon the data within its reach. And that's something that we have to think about for the CEO. What data do we give them and how do we present it? Fundamentally, we have to start with the truth. And this is a quote from Julian Assange of WikiLeaks. He's quite right, I think. You have to start with the truth. The truth is the only way that we can get anywhere, because decision-making that's based on lies or ignorance can't lead to a good conclusion. So we have to try and make the data as accessible but also true. We can't make it up, and sometimes we see Excel spreadsheets that are incorrect. We have to try and make sure the data is correct as much as possible. So now, with the advent of Power BI, we have visualizations that we can make simply and very, very easily. In the words of Karl Popper, If we can't explain it clearly and simply, then we don't understand it. And that's true of data as with anything else. So Power BI does allow us to reinvent the present, and it can also help us to make effective decisions to help transform the world. So there's quite an important thing actually that we've got here. Almost 50% of our brains as humans are dedicated to visual processing. So visualizing the data is a very effective way of getting the information across. Now, people consume data and information in different ways. So for example, JFK consumed information verbally. He liked his advisors to come in and tell him what they needed to know. Winston Churchill liked everything in memos. He wanted everything written out and laid out for him. Now, they're both great leaders, very different leaders, but both great leaders. And what we find there is they both intake information in different ways. So it's not that one way is wrong or one way is right, but we tend to find that visual processing really helps us to understand our data. And also, it's a very simple thing, but if we do color visuals, we make it engaging, and it increases the willingness of people to read our visualizations by 80%. Now, in our bodies, we have sensory receptors. We have touch, smell, taste, and obviously we can see and hear. Now, about 70% of our physical sensory receptors are in our eyes. So that's a very important message really from our bodies, that we can really visually process information very well. Sometimes it doesn't always work out the way we expect. So here's an example from Fox News on the 2012 presidential run. You'll notice I've stayed away from the 2016 presidential run. Will I not go into that one? You notice this pie chart actually adds up to over 100%. That's obviously not correct. Now, the reason it does that is because the data underlying it is actually multiple choice. So people could check more than one box. And because of that, that meant people could choose 2 or 3 options. And that meant they had the opportunity to push the data up to over 100%. So that's why that pie chart turns out like that. And here's another personal favourite. What we see here is it's our A-levels, I guess high school exams, more difficult now or not than they were previously. So when we look at this pie chart, 49% of people said yes, 50% of people said no. Now the problem is that there's not a nice, even the representation of the data is not very well represented here, because a smaller amount actually represents 66% roughly in this pie chart. So we need to try and work out how to visualize the data so it conveys a meaningful message. Here we have a pie chart which tells us 100% of people were not sure. That doesn't tell us anything. The truth is, if you're not showing data that's interesting or meaningful, you're not showing the right data. People should be engaged, and they should have that aha moment when you show them the data. You should be showing them something that makes them think. And when we see visualizations like this, it doesn't mean it's making people think. It means it's confusing them. People sometimes get swayed by very pretty pictures, as we do here. I love the colors in this one. However, the area doesn't necessarily represent the value. And you can read a commentary on this by Stephen Few, who is a data visualization expert, and he blogs over at www.perceptualedge.com. I recommend you go and have a look at his site. So for example here, it's difficult to tell what represents the larger values. For example, mortgage lending, 2007, or the NHS. It's very difficult to gauge. A few slides here. So what we want to think about is, how do we make decisions with our data? We need to acquire data, we need to acquire it, and then we need to model it, and then we need to share that data with other people around the organisation. We also need to analyse our data as well, to make sure that we're asking the right business question. So one example of that could be where the organisation Enron started to have problems. Obviously, you probably remember that Enron closed down, and those poor people were walking out of the organisation with these great big boxes full of paper And the problem is not that Enron didn't have enough data. The problem was that they had lots of data, but they didn't have the tools to go in and properly analyze and sift through it. Now, in data visualization, you have business puzzles and you have business mysteries. You can read more about this if you look at Malcolm Gladwell's book. For example, his book on outliers is very engaging and interesting to read. Now, business puzzles are very well-defined questions with very well-defined answers. And that's the sort of information that you need to give to your CEO. He wants to know the customer satisfaction index. He wants to know the financial health of the organization. He wants to know how happy the employees are. And he also wants to know what high quality or what degree of quality is a product or services that you're offering. So these are very much well-defined business questions with very well-defined answers, and you can look at those and you can visualize those using Excel. They're very, very simple. Alternatively, you could use Power BI, and you could publish those in a dashboard, and then you could send that data out to the organization. Then you also get business mysteries, and that's basically where your question is no longer well-defined, fitting in a nice slot. What you have instead is a situation where your question is not well-defined and you don't know what the answer should be. So it's a very iterative process. And business intelligence is all about time to answer. How quickly can I get my report? How quickly can I make it? How quickly can I get it to the CEO? Now, if we look at that interpretation there, we also have business analytics as well. And business analytics is all about time to answer, time to the next question, rather. So it's all about time to the next question. Because what happens is, in analytics, you have some data, you give the individual, the data consumer, your results, and then they come back at you with more questions, and you get into this cycle of producing data, then producing more questions, which you then go and answer, and that's more your business mystery. And your CEO might be interested in that, but in order to really run the business, we have to go back to our dashboard and our key metrics that we're most interested in. Now, it's not just enough to display the data. We also have to display that data using smartphones. Now, smartphones are here to stay. Recent statistics show that global smartphone sales are up by nearly 50%, according to the latest figures. And it's very likely that your CEO will have a smartphone, and he or she may want to see that data on a mobile dashboard, on their BlackBerry, on their Android phone, their Apple, or their Windows phone. Now, for example, in the year 2012, and for 3 months, from July to September 2012, over 427 million mobile phones were sold. That means on average there's about 1.8 million smartphones sold every day at that point in time. Now, Samsung is the world's most popular brand with nearly 23% of all mobiles sold. Now, so that means we're trying to think about, well, how can I create these visualizations so that they can be consumed on the Android interface as well as Apple and Windows? Now, our data needs to be correct, but if people don't understand the data visualization, then they feel that the data is not honest in some way. So we have a quote here: if it takes significant efforts to fully understand the insights, then the honesty of the visualization is actually questionable. If people don't understand it, they don't trust it. So it's very simple, really. Try and make the data as very clear to understand as possible. So how can we do that? What takeaway guidelines do we have? Well, we have to enable and empower our users, make it as easy for people to understand as possible. As developers in business intelligence, we can enrich our data by taking our data set and combining it with other data sources. We should also make an effort to try to understand statistics as well. Now, statistics are very important, actually. It helps us to see the veracity of the data, if the data is missing, for example. So there's a lot happening with the data, And statistics are great guidelines for us to see how effective it is. Now, knowing graph tools, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the tools. We'll do that now. And you have to tell a story with your data as well. Now, how do we tell a story with our data? Now, in data visualization, we could think about the data in terms of a comic book. So next time you're near a forbidden planet or something like that, go in and have a look at one of the comic books. And have a little look at it and see how effective a comic is in giving you a lot of information in a very short space of time and in an actual very physical, small, short space. When we look at comic books, they're very pacey. They manage to get a story across in a very quick and very short space of time. So basically, in a comic book, you can just pick it up and it's very clear what's happening very quickly. It should be the same with data visualization too. We should be able to tell a narrative with our data, make it engaging and interesting, and try to pack a punch of the data in as short a space as possible. So this, I recommended a book here by Scott McCloud, and it's called Understanding Comics. So if you're interested, you could head over and have a read of that. It really demystifies comics, how they're made, and there's a lot there we can learn for data visualization too. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the tools. That was one of the 5 main techniques that we should learn when we want to visualize data for the CEO. Now, SQL Server has had a reboot, I'm very glad to say, and the roadmap for it starts to look like this. So we have the reporting roadmap here. We can author reports using Power BI and SSRS, for example. How do we know which one to use? Now, for me, it's all about the Spider-Man philosophy. With great power comes great responsibility. Now, SSRS, reporting services, and Power BI are a bit like that. In Power BI, you don't have much responsibility because the data model is already there for you, and that means you don't have much power over a lot of finely controlled aspects of the report. The idea with Power BI is to think as you click the mouse. It's more tending towards your business mysteries, where you don't have a well-defined question with a very well-defined answer, and you just want to surf your way through the data. Power BI is wonderful for that. Reporting services is better for your repeatable finance reports. You can schedule them, you can send them out. If you need to export the data to another format, for example, such as PDF, reporting services allows you to export to PDF, to Word, to Excel, but in Power BI at the moment, you can only export to CSV. So I think it's partially dependent on how the data consumers decide they're going to take that data in the first place. And that brings us on to DataZen. DataZen was purchased by Microsoft. And we've got the DataZen solution here. We've actually got a server, a DataZen server, which caches and renders reports for us. We also have a Windows app for creating and consuming reports, and we also have a web app as well for consuming reports. And that makes it easier for people to see on the mobile device. And that's how our CEO will want to see a lot of his or her data. It was acquired by Microsoft in April 2015. And if you have a SQL Server Enterprise license, then you can go and install and download it and use it. From 2016 onwards, DataZen is integrated with reporting services. And that makes that a really nice feature, and it opens up the opportunities to use more technology and more visualizations and reporting services. So here's a little bit of what it looks like. We have the enterprise environments there, and we have SQL, OLAP, or files as our data source, and those get consumed by the DataZen server. What we have then is a validation of those data sources by Active Directory. Then we can consume the data using a web browser and HTML5, or we could use viewer applications in order to do that. We could consume it using iOS, Android, Windows Phone, or Windows 10, that would be. So we have DataZen in a number of data sources. It can consume multiple data sources. So that's obviously something very useful for us. People like to enrich their data by putting data with other data, and that makes it really useful for people to get some context rather than just the raw data on its own. So we've also got real-time data as well. Sometimes people need that. Now, I don't tend to think CEOs will need real-time data. If they start to need that, then they're starting to move away from a far-reaching strategy down into more operational and tactical aspects of the business. And that's where the middle management should really be looking at. So I recommend that probably it's better to think long-term and more about vision when we speak to our CEO. Normally, an organisation will have a mission statement, and that will be translated into a vision for the organisation, which will be translated into a strategy and goals, and then that gets translated into an execution plan. How are we going to reach these goals? So we've got here that DataZen and reporting services are integrated together, and that will mean you've got a one-stop shop for your KPIs, your reports and your dashboard. That means your CEO can go and get what he or she needs, and your middle management can go and get what they need as well. And the operational people can go and get the information there too. So it's just nice having one place for everything. And here's a very quick example of a sample dashboard. I don't tend to use lots of red, yellow, green. What I try and do is I will try to focus on red if it's there. If something is okay, I'll just leave it plain. I would leave that white. And the reason for that is I want the red, the alert or the issue, to pop out at people. In data visualization, we've got something called the data ink ratio. It's not a hard and fast rule. Like most things in data visualization, it's all about what's the best guess in that situation. So what we have with the data ink ratio is we are trying to show the maximum amount of data with the least amount of ink on the page. So we're trying to make things look as clean and as clear as possible. So in this particular case, I've just put in this example here, I'd probably want the red to pop out at people, because then the CEO can look at it and he can say, I need to direct my attention towards that piece. Then we start to see some of the more detailed aspects. Now, the CEO might not be so interested in those unless there is a problem. Now, if you go and read about the information by Professor Ben Schneiderman, I recommend that you review his materials. He's on YouTube. His lectures and information visualization are extremely engaging, so that's a takeaway homework for you to do. He talks about the golden mantra of information visualization. We've got a very quick summary of it, which is basically CEOs and people tend to want the summary first, and then once they've got the summary, they want to zoom and filter in the data, and then they want to see the detail burrowed right down. Now, the reason they want the summary is to give them headlines and guidelines so that they can start to direct their attention. And that's the second stage, where we start to zoom and filter in the data and try to suffer away to see what we need to look at that particular point to answer our business question. Then we've got the detail as well. People normally need to see that if they want to fact check and if they want to double check the veracity of the data. So Power BI, you can see, move towards more summarizing, visualizing the data so we can filter and zoom, and then down to the detail as well. And it really allows people to navigate their data in a way that's supported by this psychological literature. So with that, I'm just going to summarize and stop there. But the idea of this session is to get you thinking about how do you present your data and visualize it more for the senior people in the organization. So in terms of our business statistics, it's 4 key metrics to go and look at: our customer satisfaction, and we have our index of how well our products and services are performing. We're also interested in employee engagement, and we also want to know the financial health of the company as well. So those 4 things are a great starting point. If you need more information on that, you can look at Bernard's Mars blog. My name is Jen Stirrup, and you can look me up at jenstirrup.com. I've got some material up there. And with that, I want to say thank you very, very much for your time in this session. I hope you've enjoyed it, and please let me know if you've got any other questions. Please send me an invite on LinkedIn. My name is Jen Stirrup, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.